It took Sarah 3 days of digging through records, making phone calls, and running down dead ends before she found Patricia Holbrook. Patricia had been a registered nurse at Brennan Women's Health Clinic from 2004 until it closed in 2011. 7 years working directly with Dr. Brennan. After the clinic closed, she had moved to Florida and was now working at a small family practice in Tampa. Sarah called her on a Thursday afternoon, identifying herself as a detective investigating allegations against Dr. Brennan. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. "Miss Holbrook? Are you still there?" When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was tight, controlled. "I signed an NDA when I left the clinic. I can't talk about what happened there." Sarah had expected this. NDAs were common in medical malpractice cases, used to silence potential witnesses under the threat of legal action. "I understand you're concerned about the NDA. But Ms. Holbrook, I'm investigating serious criminal allegations. If Dr. Brennan violated his patients, an NDA cannot legally protect him, and it cannot prevent you from cooperating with a police investigation." Another long silence. "What kind of allegations?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Unauthorized surgical procedures. Specifically, hysterectomies performed on women without their consent." She heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath. "How many women have come forward?" "So far one. But I believe there are more." Patricia was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might hang up. When she finally spoke again, her voice was shaking. "I tried to report it. Years ago. Nobody believed me. They said I was making it up to cover my own mistakes. They said I was trying to deflect blame for poor patient care. The medical board dismissed my complaint without even investigating." Sarah's heart was pounding. "What did you try to report, Ms. Holbrook?" Patricia's voice broke. Dr. Brennan was performing hysterectomies on young women who came in for routine procedures. Abortions mostly. Sometimes just consultations or minor surgeries. But he would tell us, the nursing staff, that there were complications, that the procedures were medically necessary, that these women were high risk. Sarah was writing furiously, her hand cramping as she tried to capture every word. "Go on." He targeted specific women. Young women. Low-income women. Women of color. Women who he thought wouldn't question him, wouldn't have the resources to fight back. He would schedule them for procedures under general anesthesia, and then he would perform surgeries they hadn't consented to. How many women are we talking about? At least 20 that I knew of. But I was only there for 7 years and I only worked certain shifts. There could have been more. Probably were more. Sarah felt cold all over. 20 women. Minimum. Why would he do this? What was his motive? Patricia's laugh was bitter, hollow. Research. He was obsessed with uterine tissue regeneration research. He had grants, funding from pharmaceutical companies. He needed tissue samples, fresh tissue from young, healthy women. And instead of going through proper channels, getting consent, using tissue banks, following ethical protocols, he just took what he wanted from patients who trusted him. Sarah's hand was shaking now. "You said you reported this. What happened?" "I went to the medical board in 2008 after I saw him falsify records for 3 women in 1 month. I brought documentation, I brought concerns, I explained exactly what I had witnessed. They conducted what they called an investigation, which consisted of asking Dr. Brennan if the allegations were true. Of course he denied everything. He said I was a disgruntled employee with a grudge. He said I had made medication errors that I was trying to cover up. He said I was unstable. And they believed him?" Patricia's voice was thick with old anger and grief. He was a respected doctor with decades of experience and powerful connections. "I was a nurse who couldn't prove my allegations because all the records had been altered. So yes, they believed him. They dismissed my complaint. And then he made my life hell until I quit." Sarah could hear Patricia crying quietly on the other end of the line. "Miss Holbrook, I need you to tell me everything you remember. Every detail. Every woman you can identify. Because if we're going to stop him, if we're going to get justice for these women, we need your testimony." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steadier. "I've been carrying this guilt for 10 years. Every day I think about those women. About what he did to them. About how I couldn't stop him. If there's finally a chance to hold him accountable, to make sure he never hurts anyone else, then yes. I'll tell you everything." They talked for 2 more hours. Patricia described the procedures she had witnessed, the way Dr. Brennan would dismiss nursing staff during critical moments, the altered records she had seen, the women who had come back months or years later confused about their fertility issues. She gave Sarah names, or at least the names she could remember. Some were just first names, fragments of memories from nearly a decade ago. But it was a start. Patricia also revealed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dr. Brennan hadn't been working alone. He had a network. An anesthesiologist who asked no questions, a medical records clerk who altered documents, a practice manager who intimidated anyone who raised concerns. This wasn't just one rogue doctor. This was a systematic operation designed to exploit vulnerable women for profit and research. When Sarah finally hung up, it was after midnight. She sat in her dark office, staring at the pages of notes she had taken, feeling the weight of what she had just learned. 20 women. Minimum. All violated by someone they had trusted. All living with losses they might not even fully understand yet. Maya Alvarez wasn't alone. She was just the first one brave enough to demand answers. Sarah picked up her phone and texted Maya. "We need to talk. I found someone who worked at the clinic. You were right about everything." Then she sat back in her chair, staring at the case file that was growing on her desk. This was going to be the most important case of her career. She could feel it. Dr. Richard Brennan had spent 15 years thinking he had gotten away with it. That his reputation and his carefully constructed lies would protect him forever. He was wrong. If you're shocked by what you just heard, I need you to subscribe right now, because what Detective Martinez uncovers next will prove that this was just the beginning of a much larger conspiracy. And here's a question for you. If you were Patricia Holbrook carrying the weight of this knowledge for 10 years, would you have had the courage to come forward? Or would the fear of retaliation have kept you silent? Let me know in the comments what you would have done. Sarah Martinez sat across from Captain Robert Chin in his office, a thick file folder on the desk between them. She had spent the last week building what she believed was a solid preliminary case. She had Patricia Holbrook's testimony. She had Maya Alvarez's medical records and the glaring inconsistencies within them. She had a list of other potential victims. She had evidence of a pattern. But as she watched her captain's face while he read through her report, she could see the doubt forming. Captain Chin was 58 years old, a career cop who had risen through the ranks through careful, methodical police work. He was cautious by nature, and right now his caution was showing. He finally looked up at her, his expression troubled. "Sarah, I appreciate the work you've put into this. But you're asking me to authorize a full investigation into a doctor with a 40-year career, based on allegations from procedures that happened 15 years ago. Do you understand what kind of resources that's going to take? What kind of scrutiny we're going to face?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady but urgent. "Captain, we have a credible witness who worked at the clinic. We have medical records that don't match the procedures performed. We have at least one victim with documented proof that her uterus was removed without consent. This isn't speculation. This is real." Captain Chin sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is a 15-year-old case against a respected doctor. The defense will tear us apart if we don't have ironclad evidence. They'll say memories are unreliable. They'll say the victims are mistaken or lying. They'll bring in expert witnesses who will testify that maybe these procedures were medically necessary and just poorly documented. And if we move forward and can't make it stick, Dr. Brennan will sue this department for harassment, and we'll look like we're on a witch hunt." Sarah felt frustration rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "So we do nothing? We let him get away with violating dozens of women because it might be difficult to prosecute? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need more. We need documentation. We need multiple victims willing to testify. We need to prove pattern and intent. And we need someone who understands the legal complexities of medical fraud cases." Sarah sat back thinking, what if I brought in a prosecutor who specializes in this? Someone who could guide the investigation from a legal standpoint? Captain Chin considered this, then nodded slowly. "If you can get a prosecutor on board, someone willing to commit to this case, then I'll authorize a limited task force. But Sarah, this needs to be airtight. We get one shot at this." Sarah left the captain's office and immediately made a call she had been putting off. Jennifer Kim was a prosecutor with the state attorney's office who had made a name for herself going after medical fraud and corporate malfeasance. Sarah had worked with her on one previous case, and she knew Jennifer was brilliant, relentless, and not afraid of powerful defendants. Jennifer answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and professional. "Martinez, it's been a while. What do you need?" Sarah took a breath. "I need someone who's willing to take on a doctor who's been performing unauthorized hysterectomies on vulnerable women for over a decade." There was a pause, then Jennifer's voice came back, sharper and more focused. "Tell me everything." They met that afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between their offices. Jennifer Kim was 39 years old, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. She dressed impeccably, today in a tailored navy suit that screamed competence and authority. She had built her career on taking cases that other prosecutors thought were too complicated or too risky. Sarah laid out everything she had. Maya's story, Patricia's testimony, the pattern of complaints, the closed clinic, the research papers. Jennifer listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook, her expression growing darker with each detail. When Sarah finished, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, staring at her notes. This is organ trafficking. You understand that, right? He wasn't just committing malpractice. He was harvesting organs from unconsenting patients for profit and research. That's federal crime territory. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had known what Brennan did was criminal, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it even more horrifying. Can we prove it? Jennifer tapped her pen against her notebook. We need to follow the research. If he published papers based on tissue samples, we need to know where that tissue came from. We need to subpoena records from every hospital and research facility he's ever worked with. We need to find out who funded his research and what they knew about his methods. And we need to find every single woman he victimized. She looked up at Sarah, her eyes fierce. This is going to be a long, difficult investigation. We're going to face resistance from the medical establishment, from his attorneys, possibly from his research partners who won't want to admit they were complicit. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought of Maya's face when she realized what had been done to her. She thought of Patricia's voice breaking as she confessed the guilt she'd carried for 10 years. She thought of all the other women out there who still didn't know the truth. I'm prepared. Jennifer smiled grimly. Good. Because we're about to go to war. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Jennifer worked 18-hour days building their case. Jennifer filed subpoenas for records from every medical facility where Dr. Brennan had held privileges. Hospitals in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts. Research facilities. Medical schools where he had taught. They requested everything: surgical logs, research protocols, funding documents, correspondence. The resistance they faced was immediate and substantial. Hospital administrators claimed records from 15 years ago had been destroyed or archived in ways that made them difficult to access. Some institutions sent heavily redacted documents citing patient privacy laws, despite the fact that the investigation was specifically about those patients. Others simply delayed, claiming it would take months to compile the requested information. But Jennifer was relentless. She filed court orders. She threatened contempt charges. She made it clear that obstruction of a criminal investigation would not be tolerated. Slowly the documents started arriving, and what they revealed was damning. Sarah sat in the makeshift task force room they had set up, surrounded by boxes of files, and pieced together the timeline of Dr. Richard Brennan's research career. Between 2004 and 2010, Brennan had published 12 peer-reviewed research papers on uterine tissue regeneration and reproductive organ transplantation. The research was groundbreaking, cited hundreds of times by other scientists, and had positioned Brennan as a leading expert in the field. The research had been funded by Chemtech Pharmaceuticals, a major drug company based in New Jersey. Over those 6 years, they had given Brennan over $8 million in research grants. $8 million. Sarah read through the research papers carefully, even though much of the medical terminology was beyond her expertise. But certain things were clear. Brennan's research required fresh, healthy uterine tissue samples. Lots of them. The papers cited sample sizes of dozens of specimens, all from consenting donors aged 20 to 35. Jennifer came into the room carrying another box of documents, her face grim. I found the funding agreements between Brennan and Chemtech. They're remarkably specific about the tissue requirements. Fresh samples only, no more than 12 hours post-extraction. Healthy tissue from women of reproductive age with no history of uterine abnormalities. Very specific parameters. Sarah looked up at her. Parameters that would be almost impossible to meet through normal channels. Exactly. Organ and tissue donation has strict protocols. Donors have to give explicit consent. There are waiting lists, matching procedures, documentation requirements. If Brennan was getting dozens of tissue samples meeting these exact specifications, he couldn't have been going through legitimate channels. The supply doesn't exist. Sarah felt sick to her stomach, so he created his own supply. He targeted young, healthy women who came to his clinic for other procedures, and he harvested their organs without consent. Jennifer nodded, her jaw tight. He was using these women as unwilling donors, treating them like livestock, like their bodies were resources for him to exploit. This isn't just medical malpractice, Sarah. This is organ trafficking. This is treating human beings as commodities. Can we prove Chemtech knew what he was doing? Jennifer shook her head. Not yet. The funding agreements all stipulate that Brennan was responsible for ensuring ethical compliance. There's language about informed consent and IRB approval. On paper they covered themselves. But did they ask questions? Did they wonder how one doctor at a small clinic was producing this much tissue? That's what we need to find out. Sarah stood up, looking at the wall where they had started building a timeline. Photos of Brennan, copies of his research papers, dates of complaints, names of victims. How many women, Jennifer? How many did he hurt to produce this research? Jennifer's voice was quiet but firm. That's what we need to find out. And to do that, we need to find the other victims. Finding the other victims was like assembling a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing or deliberately hidden. Sarah and Maya worked together, spending long hours in Sarah's office, cross-referencing every document they could find. They started with the incomplete patient records from Brennan Women's Health Clinic. The clinic had supposedly destroyed most patient files when it closed, but fragments remained: appointment logs, billing records, insurance claims. Names and dates, but often little else. Sarah pulled records from fertility clinics across Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York. Women who had sought fertility treatment between 2005 and 2020. Then she cross-referenced those names with the fragments from Brennan's clinic. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Dozens of women who had visited Brennan's clinic for routine procedures, abortions, consultations, minor surgeries, had later sought fertility treatment. Many had been told they couldn't conceive due to uterine abnormalities or absence. Some had been referred for surrogacy. Others had simply been told that pregnancy wasn't possible for them. How many of them knew why? How many had ever been told they no longer had a uterus? Sarah and Maya started making calls. It was delicate work, reaching out to women about intimate medical details from years ago, explaining that they might have been victims of a crime they didn't even know had been committed against them. Many of the numbers were disconnected. Some women didn't want to talk, didn't want to revisit painful memories. But others listened. And when they listened, they remembered. The second victim they found was Keisha Williams. Keisha was 41 years old, living in Boston, working as a high school guidance counselor. When Sarah called her and explained the investigation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Dr. Brennan performed a hysterectomy on me when I was 26. I've always had questions about whether it was really necessary, but I trusted him. He was my doctor. Sarah's heart was pounding. Can you tell me what happened? Keisha's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the old pain underneath. I went to his clinic in 2008 because I was having heavy, irregular periods. Nothing I couldn't handle, but it was inconvenient and sometimes painful. Dr. Brennan examined me and said I had fibroids. He recommended surgery to remove them. I was nervous about surgery, but he was very reassuring. He said it was routine, that I'd recover quickly, that it would solve my problems. So I agreed. I went in for what I thought was going to be fibroid removal. When I woke up, he told me there had been complications. He said my uterus was more damaged than he'd realized, that there was extensive endometriosis, that he'd had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to prevent serious bleeding. Sarah was writing furiously. Did you consent to a hysterectomy before the surgery? No. I consented to fibroid removal. He said the hysterectomy was an emergency decision made during the procedure. What happened after that? Keisha's voice was bitter. I was devastated. I didn't have children yet. I had always planned to have children. And suddenly that option was just gone. Dr. Brennan was very sympathetic. He said he was sorry, that he had saved my life, that I should focus on the fact that I was healthy. I tried to get pregnant through surrogacy years later, but it was too expensive. I never had children. It's been one of the biggest regrets of my life. Sarah took a breath, dreading what she had to say next. Ms. Williams, we've been investigating Dr. Brennan. We have reason to believe he performed unauthorized hysterectomies on multiple women. We'd like to review your medical records from that procedure. What do you mean, unauthorized? Sarah explained everything. Maya's case, Patricia's testimony, the pattern they were discovering. As she spoke, she could hear Keisha's breathing change. Are you telling me that he took my uterus when he didn't need to? That he lied about the emergency? We're investigating that possibility. Would you be willing to request your medical records from that surgery? Keisha was silent for a long moment. Yes, I want to see them. I want to know the truth. 2 weeks later, Keisha sent Sarah her medical records. Sarah and Jennifer reviewed them carefully, consulting with a gynecologist who worked as an expert witness in malpractice cases. The expert's opinion was clear. There was no documented medical justification for the hysterectomy. The preoperative notes mentioned fibroids, which were common and typically treatable without removing the entire uterus. The operative notes claimed extensive endometriosis and uncontrolled bleeding, but there were no pathology reports to support this. The tissue samples that should have been sent for analysis after the surgery were never logged. It was the same pattern as Maya's case. A procedure performed under the guise of medical necessity, but with no actual medical justification and no proper documentation. Keisha agreed to join the case as a complainant.